Today on the podcast, we are honored to speak with Reverend Dr. Basile Sede, a Cameroon born Catholic priest, philosopher, and author. His books include Hegel's philosophy of history, a challenge to the African thinker, comparing cultures and religions in a postmodern world, and chasing or being chased, deconstructing Hegel's vision of the United States of America. In his work, he explores how traditional philosophical frameworks, especially those of Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, often marginalize African thought and how migration, culture, religion, and history intertwine in ways that demand a fresh lens. What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, Father Sede, to the show to really discuss your great book, Chasing or Being Chased, Deconstructing Hegel's Vision of the United States of America. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And so let's dive into the book. But first and foremost, I want to know who is Basile Sede in simply one powerful sentence.
A Catholic priest from a city in Cameroon called Kumba, Fiango Kumba, presently serving in the Diocese of Raleigh with a PhD in philosophy and a writer.
Beautiful. You also studied in Rome, you did your PhD there, and you're deeply involved in not just in theological thought, but also in philosophical and cultural thought. And therefore, I think it's extremely enlightening to read your book, to think about Hegel and Africa and really the United States. And so, first and foremost, I'm just curious, what brought you to study Hegel? Because Hegel is one of the most important philosopher, I would say, in the modern age, especially in the Western world. So, what inspired you to actually apply Hegel's view of the world on the United States of America?
Hegel, who lived from 1770 to 1831, was a German philosopher. And they call him an idealist. Hegel is one of those who believe that everything must start from the idea. According to Hegel, reason rules the world. So that struck me when I did my first degree in philosophy. But at some point, when I started doing the masters and got into the PhD, I got attracted because Hegel, even though he was an idealist, he came to be very practical in the sense that he applied his idealistic system to the various continents. And so that's why, as you asked, I started by being worried about his classification of world history, especially when it came to Africa. And then, after having exhausted and analyzed his views concerning Africa, this time I want to touch his ideas on America, to deconstruct these ideas of his.
Beautiful. And you certainly also came across the Hegelian dialectic, right? And what
Yes.
role played Hegelian dialectic in the book specifically?
Um, Let me first move to his journey, because when Hegel talked about Africa, remember, as an idealist, he was very convinced that Africans are subhumans, if at all they are humans. Because according to Hegel in his philosophy of history, he says an African is an example of an animal man in all its savagery. You know, according to him, any contact between the European and the Africans is just to make the African a better person. For him, Africa is an unhistorical continent, a continent that has like little or nothing. They are just barbarians. And then the climax of the word for him was Germany. He glorified Europe. And then with the Protestant Revolution, when Europe started getting more secular, and if I may go back to the secularistic way of thinking, more advanced, that's when Europe now became like the cream. And then he looked at America and said, America is a new world soon to be discovered, full of opportunities. That's why you see me shifting from his vision of Africa now to America. In Africa, he was very clear and settled about his convictions concerning Africa. But about America, a few things were not clear. That's why I use the concept of deconstruction, meaning that I will evaluate his ideas from the current realities.
Beautiful. So let's dive into the book. So, what sparked the change from writing about Hegel and Africa in Hegel's philosophy of history to writing about migration and the US in chasing or being chased?
Um, First of all, I want to underline the fact that Hegelian thinking about Africa was not really Hegelian. It was the typical European conception about Africa at that time. So Hegel was just like the mouthpiece of what people knew about Africa. And as I told you, I have a whole book analyzing that. Hegel's philosophy of history, a challenge to the African thinker. Now, the reason why I brought it to America was because I realized that everybody comes into America. Everybody wants to come into America. And there is this African proverb which Chinua Achebe likes to use, or he used in his literature, that if you see a frog or a toad running during the day, it is either chasing something or it is being chased by something. So if Hegel had projected America as a new world soon to be discovered, full of opportunities, and then I ask myself today, especially as immigration is very sensitive in world politics, specifically in the politics of the United States, I ask myself, why did people start coming to this country in the first place? And then I realized that things were chasing them from their own country and they were chasing something that is in America. So it's like you are running to get something, or something is behind you, then you run to an unknown destination. So that is precisely how America has been from its foundation till today. That we see even Africans. At first, Africans were being forced here. I'm trying to establish somewhere in the book equally that of all those who were coming to the New World, America, Africans, so to say, African Americans, are the only group of people who came here by force. So why did they come? Why did the Europeans force them in? Those are all the things I am answering in this publication.
Yeah, that's so timely. I think it's always, and I think general, like immigration, it's not just in the US, it's everywhere. It's always there's some tension, which is really normal. It's human nature. Therefore, it's so good that we actually deconstruct it and try to understand it, right? Because it's always helpful if you understand both sides, right? The people who actually fear migration, but also the people who who use migration to either because of pull or push factors, right? And I think you make a beautiful case in chasing
Yes.
or being chased. The title is powerful, chasing or being chased. What made you choose the specific metaphor, and what does it reveal for you about migration and historical narrative?
Because I came to realize that apart from the Native Americans, every other person in this country is an immigrant. It's a country that is built by immigrants, with immigrants, and I dare to say for immigrants. I am not in any way saying that you open the borders for everybody to come in, no. But I want us to be convinced and to accept historical facts that all of us are strangers. From there, we can start now to analyze and to fix, knowing that we are not just doing it as people who have no history. Our history should humiliate us. And the good thing, as I am trying to establish, is that in every generation of immigrants, there have always been a procedure. There have always been conflicts. There have always been ways to fix. Sometimes it is tight, sometimes it is loose. But the fact is that America has always been a country where people are rushing in. So I analyze equally what are the things happening in all the other countries. What were the things happening in Russia, Poland, Italy, Germany? You can name the rest of the countries that are represented here. What was happening there at a certain historical epoch that caused them to be rushing out? What was in America? America has a certain magnet till today. That you come to this country, even if you come to visit, you feel like staying. So that is what we are talking about. And I was privileged because I got some people first-handed. I got somebody from Germany, somebody from Guyana, somebody from Pakistan, somebody from Italy, and a few other countries who came here first-handed. And I realized that the way they lived at the time that they came are just the same like the ways that people who come in today are living in relation to their countries of origin. And at the same time, the factors that was chasing them at that time, 1890, early 19th century, to come to the United States are the same factors chasing people today from their own country to come into the United States of America. And then I ask myself, how do we fix these other countries back home? That's where the greatest challenge is.
Elaborate a little bit on the main factors that you figured out, especially you were talking about some of your Italian, Pakistani friends and others. So what were some of the main factors that made them come to the United States of America?
War, in some cases religious persecution, like in England, Scotland, some of those places had real religious persecution. Russia, remember the anti-Semitism, the Jews had, most of them were living in Russia, so there was that war going on. And then poverty, like in Ireland, they had this a potato famine, you know, so most of them had to come out hunger. Even in Germany, there was little or no job, so things were hard in those countries. People had to look for survivor. Then at the same time, as America goes ahead, you realize that jobs were always there. Remember, it was a new world that was being created. And then like the Chinese immigrants, I was excited to know that when they were constructing the railways, linking a few places together, they needed labor. So they had to give almost free immigration status to people from Asia, Japanese, Chinese. They were rushing in. And then when they got enough of them, they tighten the policies. So that's how America has always been growing. So the history of this country is exciting.
It
So those
is.
were the factors we are talking about.
It is. It is definitely right. I mean, ultimately, you gotta always have people, right, and to help building the country. That's not different really to other European countries. I mean, in the past, in Switzerland, there were the Italians who built all the roads and so on and so forth, right? So that's
Yes,
so
that's why I'm
important.
saying
But
that any group of immigrants that came here, they contributed something to America. Everybody comes with the best to put into the best, so that stagnation is never American.
absolutely, I think that's so important, right? Now the problem is always you always also have bad apples, obviously too. I mean that's also a fact, right? And usually those kind of bad apples, like that, they make a thing that then people overreact to some extent, right? And but it's always it's a balance, right? That you have to find.
Yes. You know, I always quote Aristotle. I'll always remember his most fundamental principle that virtue lies in the middle. You know, so at the end of the day, in as much as we want to put laws, we want to be strict, we must ask ourselves, what is the middle ground? How do we make people to be happy? Because at the end, I am also establishing that America is, you know, people call it the promised land, and it is true. You know, that's why everybody comes here for opportunities. But is America actually the end? No, all of us are on the journey to heaven. So that's coming together. It's important to celebrate this unity. That's why again my book has a lot to do with cultural diversity. You know,
It is beautiful, and you're absolutely right. And I think that what makes it still up to today, really the promised land. I think it still is, and it still attracts the best of the best. I mean, you can tell that there's still this pull factor, that America
yeah.
has. But now let's go back to the book and really unpack it further. In your view, how does Hegel's own writing fall short in capturing the realities of migration and global movement, especially those from Africa and the global south?
To answer this question, I'll make reference to my first publication, Hegel's Philosophy of History: A Challenge to the African Thinker. And the subtitle of that book is Compliment to Leopold Sédar Senghor. Leopold Sédar Senghor was a philosopher. He was the first president of Senegal and very intelligent, very smart. So after analyzing Hegel's ideas, I brought in Senghor. He challenged almost everything that Hegel was saying about Africa because philosophically speaking, our scope of rationality is the same. In as Remember, there are three different types of souls: the vegetative souls, vegetable, the sentient souls, the animals, they work by instincts and senses, and then the rational soul. Every human person has a rational soul. So with the ideas of Leopold Sedar Senghor, I challenged everything that Hegel said to downplay the Africans. Consider equally that civilization started there. Most of the great thinkers, medicine, if the history of Africa is really very rich. But at the same time, I ask myself, why is Africa today the laughing stock of the world? Which means there is a problem somewhere. As I speak to you, my president in Cameroon was elected for, I think, the seventh mandate. That's somebody who is like 92 years of age. To the best of it's very clear now from discovery and from practical reality that he even has some kind of Alzheimer's. But all these people are corrupt. The corrupt leaders now, they push him to be the president. So can you imagine somebody ruling a country for 50 years or more? And then he is not even mentally fit. Physically, sometimes he moves with the wife. If he has to greet the people, the wife would lift up his hand, to wave the people. So are we really normal? Is there something? And then you see people dancing, to applaud the fact that he has been re-elected president because of greed. So and then I keep asking myself, if Europe had a problem some time ago that made them to rush to America, now Europe is balanced. You don't have any excitement from Canada to come into America, do you? You can come and visit, but to say for survivor, it's not really that instinct of somebody apart from like the Africans and maybe Latin America and in short the third world countries. So I ask myself, when shall the African people also arrive to that extent? People can talk about colonization, they can talk about the white people, exploitation, whatever, whatever. But if you want to exploit me, it means I am also weak. When can I be that strong to take care of my own things so much so that I would not need to come to America for survival? Those are the things that I was analyzing at that time, which also comes out in this book. Now, shifting now from Africa to America, the challenge I give Hegel is this. First, if the slaves were being forced into America, it's because of capitalism. They needed workers. But again, it falls down again onto the weakness of the Africans. And that's why I am establishing that the construction of America the way it is today, in as much as we applaud our founding fathers, we hail them for the great job that they did, we should not keep aside the African Americans too, who also contributed in the building of this country. Even the Native Americans suffer a lot. They suffered a lot because at some point they were actually persecuted. Now they have no voice, you know. But then coming back again to Hegel, these are the realities of history. And that's where I come back from what you asked about the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. Because Hegel says every success of history comes as a result of conflict. And that's why postmodern thinkers now will talk about the conflict transformation theory. Before you get the best, some destruction must take place. I don't want to go into the moral part of that, but practically, that is what we see. That's why Hegel says history is melancholic. You know, things that make a lot of good sense and excitement, they are not part of history. History goes with those crude things, things that are like pain, you know. So every civilization, as Leopold Sédar said, is a result of pain and blood.
I think that's so important what you're actually saying, because that's precisely Hegel and his dialectics, right? That there's always cause and effect. So there's always a positive and a negative, and ultimately you do the synthesis, right? That takes a lot of work, right? That's always happens.
Yes.
Like you look at history, you look at the United Nations. The United Nations is simply a result of World War II, and all these conflicts, as you're just mentioning, right, is really, really it's very unfortunate, because we would love to actually learn from from reflecting, right, not through experience but through reflection, right? That's what also Confucius
Yes.
said, like the most noble way of wisdom or way of learning is really reflection, and then imitation, and lastly through experience, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
something that is really important. So now we have all these situations, and we see where it is going, and it's often not very nice, but still I think you take a very sensible and a very pragmatic approach as well, to see and look at the facts and how it is, and that it is, bottom line, history, really, what is taking place, and it's really the history of humanity. I think that's also
Yes.
sometimes very important, is that it's not necessarily the history of a particular group, but it's really the story of our collective.
Humanity. Yes. And that's why Gregory Bateson says evolution is evolution of the mind. So going back again to Hegel, the ideas, it starts from the ideas. And that's why I keep saying that, look at, even if the African Americans can complain, they can complain because actually their ancestors suffered. But then, trust me, if they were in Africa today, they would have been knocking at the doors of the United States Embassy looking for visa to come into this country. So now, how do we fix Africa and the other developing nation? What can these developed nations to do? And that's why sometimes I say I go slow on philanthropy. I do a lot of philanthropy. I like it. But I believe in the Chinese proverb that you give somebody fish, you feed him for the rest of his life. You teach him how to fish, then you grant him independence. Can we, democracy was brought to Africa, but it is being abused everywhere. Is it possible to fix that democracy, set a standard for the world. That's why Pope Francis says, if you allow people to have jobs, you make it possible for people to have jobs. Where these immigrants are coming, they will not need to migrate to come somewhere. But if you allow them to fight, then they will have every reason again to be bumping at your doors. And then who even supplies them the arms that they used to fight? That's an unanswered question. So humanity is the whole. That's why I keep saying one world, one village. If we want to fix this world, especially from these top countries, I think there's a way of making it work.
And let's, before we dive back into the book, just give me a taste. What is your take in general how to really improve the living conditions in Africa? What is one thing that you will do and one thing that you will not do?
The first thing that I want to understand, I want people to understand is that I know I've had some arguments with a few people about this, but I strongly believe that if political issues are not handled, we cannot fix any economic issue, because life is based on the economy. People have to eat. Economic tells us that there are three things that are necessary in life: feeding, that's food; clothing, and shelter. So it all goes again with the economy. But you can't fix the economy if the politics is dancing. If America is what it is today, remember, as we keep saying, America is not the end. There's another part of the book that is talking about the real promised land, because the foundation, the Christian foundation of the early fathers, we got to talk about that too. It's important. But what we are simply saying is that comparatively, America is stable because the politics works. Right now, we have what we call government shutdown, but it's not a major issue because people get on. Electricity works, water works, there is food. They have even made it possible that even poor people can go get food pantry anywhere. We have our own problems here. Nobody says that. We are not going into that. But comparatively speaking, it works because the politics is stable. The president knows what he is supposed to do. So if Africa were to be what it is, my main recommendation is for us to see how to fix the political. And that's why I keep challenging even my friends of the diaspora. We do a lot of philanthropic work, but at some point we can say, now let's leave this philanthropy. Let's see how we can get into the political. Is there anything we can do? Even to bump into a certain office in this United States and say, look, see how to touch this election. You cannot have an election which is fraud everywhere, fraud. Everybody knows that fraud has taken place. But nobody says anything. But trust me, if there is war in Cameroon today, they start fighting real war. In, International organizations will start coming in. I'm not challenging anybody. I'm not blaming anybody for our deficiency. But what I keep saying is that if we can help the world to stand, if we can help the third world to stand, let us put it as a major part of our international agenda. So, summarily speaking, to fix Africa, we got to fix the political.
And that's great. I would just want to have one follow up question because that's to me always interesting, especially given that you are a priest, right? And you are part of the most powerful, most important church, really the church, the Catholic Church. And I'm curious about how do you see, or what is the role in terms of the Catholic Church when it comes to political issues and challenges? Because there is an argument that some, especially in the church, they say, you know what, we should, take a seat back and really focus on what's essential, that is the gospel. Okay, others says, well, that's not enough, we also have to do our political work. And so where do you see, because there's also to some extent dialectics, so how far do you think you as a priest, for example, and the church in general can go in order to influence potentially politics? Because that's a slippery road. Because to me,
Yes.
the church must be and remain a common and a place for common ground. you know,
Yeah.
where we exchange, we dialogue with love, even though they might be our enemies, but it should always be guided by the love of Jesus Christ. So I'm just curious, how is your what's your
Yeah.
take on that?
Now, let me just go the take of the church, because I always tell people, including my Christians, that it's not about me, it's not about you, but it's about Jesus. It's about the church. First of all, the word politics, from the Greek word police, means of the city. So anybody is there's no way you can cut yourself off the political, because you belong to the city. You see the point? Secondly, Jesus himself challenged all the unjust structures. That's our ideal. And then the church's documents themselves will always highlight justice and peace. We can talk of Gaudium et Spes. We can talk of Evangelii Nunciandi. We can talk of Pacis in Terra. So many churches documents, they will talk about peace. They will talk about justice. And then the church is always identified as the critical conscience of the society, because Jesus himself did not hesitate to point out the injustices of the society at the time that he lived. So I always want to think that as a church, we just have to implement what the church document wants us to do, to be there for peace and to be there for justice, which means when injustice seems to override, the church should not stay quiet. I've had this conversation even with my bishops back home. And I said, sometimes I think that we are not doing enough. I'm sorry to say this in the air, but I think if we were doing enough, I don't think somebody of 90 years plus will be going in for election, and then we'll sugarcoat the fact that people should not vote for him. And that's why the former cardinal, Tumi, Christian Cardinal Tumi of Cameroon, was very vocal. He was very clear about it all. He said it 10 years ago, because just the corruption in the country shows us that the president has failed us. So the Cardinal Tumi told him straight, if I were you, President Pobia, I will resign and give the country to a more competent person. I think that for me, that's what every prelate, the church should talk about. It's not a matter of being political. It's a matter of sharing the sufferings of your people. And then we are talking about something that somebody said 10 years ago. You can imagine the depreciation that has taken place within all this time. So I want to think that to an extent, we as a church, at least in Africa, at least in my country, Cameroon, we have failed. They talk. It's not as if they don't talk. But I believe that sometimes there's a lot of sugarcoating. You know, when I think of late Archbishop Oscar Romero, if you read the work of Oscar Romero, you see somebody who in season and out of season, who went into the presidency to tell him directly that this oppression, this killing, this is not good for the sake of the people, for the sake of God. He was killed. But right now, most of us are afraid to die. So people want to be on their safe corners. So talking about the church, that's it. You know, you can also imagine all the paper documents, you know, the Pope's paper bulls and encyclicals have been very clear against injustice. It's just for us to implement
And act the right way, right?
and
I think
act the right way.
that's always, there's always room for interpretation of how far this ought to go, right? Because some would
Yes.
argue, well, it should also go and we should take action, also potentially violence, right? And so there is always this, this middle ground. It's kind of slippery. So therefore I'm just curious, what you think
I mean, it's
about
not
that.
really violence. I would not really want to use the word violence, but sometimes violence is inevitable. It's like what Hegel says about the conflict. You know, if it comes, fine, but the only thing is that whether people are reacting or they are not reacting, I've got to speak that which is true. I've got to impose the truth on people, even though they say we speak the truth, but in charity, but it's the same truth that is being spoken without sugarcoating.
Absolutely. I think this is very powerful, and this is what really Jesus did, right? He always spoke up,
Yes.
to people in power. Yeah, that's so important. Thank you so much for sharing. So let's go back. How do you see the United States today through the lens of your book? Is it still the land of chasing, or more a destination of those being chased? Is it both?
I want to look at it from two angles, from the political and from the religious. From the political, it is still the land of chasing or being chased. Of course, when I talk about political, I put in the economical and the social. America, the healthcare, it may not be the best, but trust me, it is far more than so many other countries in the world. Talking about the social life, it may not be the best, but it is far more than. So there is something, the pull and the push. There's something pulling people. There's something that people are chasing to find in America. Education. That's why people from Africa, developing country, if you open the borders free, nobody will remain behind. Everybody will want to come in. I used to tell people to come, to be very, very basic, that, one of the things that attracts me in this country is that you get up at any time in the night, you put on the electricity, you are sure that it comes on. You open the tap, you are sure it's there. You get into your car, you want to drive anywhere, the roads are good. You don't have all those things in other places. If I have a problem now, I rush to the hospital, they will first attend to me before they start sending you even the bills for you to pay. You don't get that in many countries. I know Europe, they have their own better. I think I enjoyed the healthcare in Europe, but the fact is that it is pretty much the same thing with America. But in the developing countries, it's just a mess. That's why they will continue to be chasing this better life in the United States. And then all the conflicts back are chasing them. But let's come back now to the moral aspect. That's where the issue now twists a bit, because I remember Mike Huckabee, one of the ambassadors, he made a very powerful statement. He says, America is a special nation because it was founded by people who were first on their knees before they were on their feet. We are a nation rooted in our faith. So underline the fact that they were first on their knees. You know what it means to be on their knees? Pointing up to God before they got on their feet. If you look at the founding fathers, most of them were they had their own religious conflicts anyhow, but the basic Judeo-Christian values influenced them a lot. And it is documented, as I am trying to establish here, that the founding fathers, they quoted the Bible far more than all the other existentialist literatures put together. So you can imagine. So their bases were all on fundamental principles, which means at that time, even though spiritual things were chasing them, because you go like in England, France, Germany, all the other places, the Puritans and the Protestants and the Catholics, they have their own issues. That was chasing them. But at the same time, that newness, the newfound values were equally chasing them too at the positive angle. And that's why it is even said that one of the reasons why they were pushing, some of the slaves in again, trying to do what was for conversion into Christianity. Then by worry now is this, it has gone the other way around. Prayers are hardly now in schools. Things that are religious now are being underlooked. Even some of the social issues that seem to be issues. Look at, I don't want to judge anybody. They look at something like transgender. Look at something like gay marriage and all this type of stuff. In those days, you will be jailed if you bring up this issue. You'll be put to jail. Then now, they have become like standard. So the question I ask myself is this: is it that the Christians themselves are chasing these values, which I call postmodern values? Because postmodernism is about radical liberalism, what they call progressivism. Or is it that these values themselves are chasing the Christians? So if we are not careful, we lose it. And the question now is, are people happier today when they seem to absorb all these other anti-Christian tendencies? Because all the major Christian religions will not endorse radical liberalism, the so-called progressivism. What is their creed? I'm quoting so many people about this. So you see, the chasing or being chased mentality is not only limited to the political, it comes also to the spiritual. And I ask myself, what are we handing over to our children?
And that's my question. Really, what do we hand over to our children if we continue with this kind of progressivism that really gets rid of basically anything, including the tradition on which the United States of America is really built on? And these are Christian, first and foremost, Christian values. So, what's
Yes.
at risk?
So I think the risk is that we got to go back to the very concept of goodness, because I always like to quote Alexis de Tocqueville. He was also one of these strong political philosophers of French origin. He says, America is great because she is good. If America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. So you see him now deconstructing the concept of greatness. And then if we come back now to goodness, it diffuses itself either to the political or to the religious. Goodness remains goodness. So how do we do? So if we are implementing any policy, political policy, we got to ask ourselves, what is the good that comes out of this? Both for us, the United States citizens, and even for those who are suffering in other parts of the world. What is that goodness in it? And if we are to talk about the religious aspect, we ask ourselves, if we are compromising all these moral values, is it adding to the goodness of our children or of our community? If you look at it, mental health crises are increasing because of a lot of liberalism coming up. I'm not saying that people should not be free, no. But like Pope John Paul will always ask, with all the development in technology and science and all the light, does it help the human person to be better? Does it help us to be more human and more personalistic to one another? Does it touch our consciences? And that's why Pope Francis again makes a distinction between the small politics and the big politics. For him, the church goes to the big politics because small politics is about party politics. Whether you are Republican, Democrat, or whatever party, that's small politics. The church does not really get into that. Big politics is about human dignity. It's about charity. It's about personalism. Again, to use the words of Pope John Paul II. That person-to-person relationship, without which the future of mankind will be meaningless.
I can really see your passion and your conviction that you have and your faith that you have in this country, really, because it's important, I think, that people believe in a country, in a project. Do you still feel that there is still a common project of the good, the city on the hill, let's say? Do you feel that while being and living and really serving in North Carolina?
Yes, I think I see a horizon of hope, at least for America, because first of all, the parish where I live, where I work, and all the other parishes, in fact, the dioceses in North Carolina are expanding. At first, I was thinking that the statistics are bringing down the number of Christians, but I just realized that within the past 2 years, it has actually been increasing. And then with the election of Pope Leo the 14th, it has also given us some hope. So I think we are getting there. So, and as the Christianity continues to increase, that's how religiosity increases, and that's how the faith increases, and that's how the fear of God also increases. And trust me, that's how human dignity is supposed to increase.
Do you think that you have actually the most important work, that anyone can actually have, that is helping people find values that help them and inform their decision, their life, their outlook on life in order to live the good life? How do you conceptualize your role in America?
First of all, I look at myself as an African clergy, and I want people to understand, in spite of the history with people like Hegel about Africa, in spite of the history with the conflicts that we've had in this country, in spite of all the other things that are challenging us in the postmodern generation, we've got to understand that God is always in control. And we've got to understand that all of us, we have our own values to put on the table. We have to understand that God has a purpose for bringing us together, for creating even this technology that unites you and I. There's a purpose for that. And the purpose is evangelization. And the bottom line of evangelization is personalism. I'll always underline that. I used to tell people that in those days, priests would leave from Europe, to evangelize in Africa. They will leave from America to evangelize Africa. But now, the number of us African priests who are working in Europe and America is enormous. Why? I cannot answer, you cannot answer, God knows why. And that's the way life goes round. And that's why Hegel himself says history goes round. He did not talk much about priesthood and things that those know, but I'm deconstructing him. So I'm looking at his thoughts now with different angles. So it is all a progressive world that is progressing in different angles. And I'm so happy. My greatest joy is that people accept us in spite of our cultural difference or accent or color or whatever, because of what value that true God we too put on the table. If I stand sometime in church, I got a congregation of like 3,000 people in front of me. I cannot thank God enough because that's part of his mission of evangelization. Just like the forefathers of the Caucasians came to preach to us, that's how God has made us to come and preach here. Who knows tomorrow? Maybe people will be coming from some other places. Who knows? Or it may turn around again. The most important thing is to celebrate life, knowing, as I keep saying, that our final promised land is not on this earth, it is in God's kingdom.
What do you hope listeners will take away from your work, both in terms of philosophical insight and in practical or ethical terms, for how we understand migration history and freedom?
First of all, we got to understand that migration did not start today. Right from the biblical days, Jesus himself was a migrant. Migration has always been part of human history. Secondly, we've got to understand that migration issues are very sensitive. That's why I am proposing, and my approach is the approach of the philosophy of history. Philosophy of history is that branch of philosophy that asks whether there is any value, whether there is any use of human history. What do we learn from history? The values that we get from history. So if I look at all these historical incidents that have passed, as crude as they may be, what is the way forward? That's what I want people to take from this book. First, we should not forget history, because if we forget history, we will not evaluate the present well. So if all of us know that we are all migrants in one way or another, then we shall know how to respect each other. Because I am highlighting not only physical migration, but spiritual migration. Because we are all on the way to heaven. And I ask myself, if Physical migration does not concern people, because some people may just say, what concerns me whether people are coming to America or not? I was born in America. Or whether people are coming to Canada, Europe or not. Any What applies to America, please, applies to all the other first world countries, because that's how people go to all the other first world countries as they come to America. But what we are saying is this: even if these physical migrations do not concern us, trust me, the fact that we come together creates already a tension in itself, because it's not easy to accept the new. So I'll not blame even those who would look at me at first suspect me before they accept me for who I am. I'll not blame them. That's very human. But the bottom line is this: at the end of the day, we have to learn how to coexist. And then the spiritual migration concerns all of us, because if I don't relate with you well, how do I confront Jesus Christ in eternity, who says, love one another, who himself was a migrant? And there is this relationship that I always make with the book of Revelation. Remember, John says, when he was around God's throne, he saw people of all tribes and cultures and nations and languages all together, around God's throne. Is that not to tell us that we got to start living imitating the life of heaven here on earth? That's the reason why God wants us to come together, so that we can start already getting that communion, so that together we shall have that union in the perfect stance in God's own kingdom.
Beautifully said. I love that spiritual migration, and that's what it really is, because as we know, the dawn of humanity is in Africa, right? And so at the very essence, we are all at some point we were Africans, if you believe in the theory of evolution. Um, so that's wonderful, and I love that. But I can also tell something that is so particular is the fact that America is still, as you mentioned, right? There's so Christianity is still so strong and it is growing, whereas in Europe it's basically falling
Yeah,
apart.
yeah, that's
And you
another part
see
of
it as well when it comes to political issues. I mean, when you look at Europe, the European Union, it's just so far behind that there's no way that they will ever catch up in term with China or the United States of America. I mean, just the vision that they have and keep pushing because they know the only way forward in order to improve ourselves and our societies is to invent and reinvent time and again. Of course, again, as you said, right, there's always a middle ground. It can always go in one or another extreme, but that's what I also see. How do you see that push and the differences between Europe, the United States of America, and just the fact that they differ in so many ways when it comes to how they inspire people to come or not to come or to innovate or in terms of their faith? What is it? What do you think is the main difference between the United States of America and Europe?
um I think the main difference between the United States of America and Europe is more on the fact that the United States is a new world. And as a new world, it is said that America is built on the mistakes of Europe. That's at the physical sense. Because if you look at America, as we always say, everything is big. Everything is big. It's just like the double side of Europe. But that notwithstanding, at the moral perspective, it still goes down to the same thing, because America again is the big size of Europe, because all the religious values, all those who left the persecution, all the people who flee from persecutions, they were fleeing from religious persecution. So when they came to America now, I mean, not all, anyhow, some of them in some countries. I'm talking about the founding fathers. When they came to America now, they wanted to secure that at the foundation. And if you look at American politics too, it has absorbed even the Christianity in its own way. And then the fact equally that the country was built somehow on these Christian values, even though at the end it was not like a religious state, or a Christian state. And then look at even those who migrate to come in here. Most of them, like the Filipinos, 90%. Look at Latin America. Great portion of them, more than 80% are Christians. So you can imagine that. And it's a country that is always accepting immigrants from these places. So that boosts equally the Christian spirituality. But if you look at Europe, for example, with the things that have happened in Europe and the fact that the clergy circle is not growing, it's also bringing it down, the numbers of believers. But the bottom line is that it's all God's will. That's the best way I can look at it. It's all God's will.
Beautiful, Father. What's next for you? Any project or direction that build on chasing or being chased?
The main project I have now is to let this book go as much as possible, because I know what is in here when it comes to the future of humanity. And it's not all about America. It's about the developing countries and the developed countries. Secondly, the next project that I have is on world religions. I'm trying to evaluate the respective world religions. So maybe sometime next year we'll start talking about that. That's my next book coming up. This is my 6th publication. So I'm looking forward to the 7th.
I can't wait, Father, and talk to you soon again. Thank you so much for being on the show again, for really talking about your book, Chasing or Being Chased, Deconstructing Hegel's Vision of the United States of America. What a blessing. Thank you so much, Father, for being on the show.
God bless you. Thank you. And thanks to all the viewers. Always stay tuned. God bless you all.
Father Basile Sede. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.